Hello. Thank you for the welcome. Thank you, Barbara, for inviting me to this session. Really excited to be here. Barbara gave me this invitation, and I thought I would use it as an opportunity to have a thought experiment about this question. So these are questions that I'm going to be talking about today that I've developed just through the exercise of the past few months, thinking through it, and I realized that I've had to scrunch it down to a few questions only. And as I'll talk more about later, I'm really interested to hear your feedback on what you think some of the most important questions are for conserving plants and understanding plants during future climate change issues. Okay, so climates are changing. We're seeing some rapid, dramatic events happening. This is a photograph looking east over Oakhurst, California. I don't think it comes out too well in this slide, but you see a brownish, reddish tinge, and these are ponderosa pines that are dying. They're basically at the low elevation limit of their species range as it's situated there in the Sierra Nevada. So we're witnessing a dramatic potential rain shift of the species responding to a massive drought, right? At the same time, California is extremely diverse. We have lots of endemic taxa. This is a cutleaf monkey flower, and it grows in seeps beneath these same forests. And this is also the low elevation species range limit for that species. And so it's interesting to compare and contrast how different species are reacting to such a dramatic event as the drought that we've just witnessed, or perhaps are still in. So, just to set the context, the California drought in 2014 has an estimated return interval of 700 to 900 years, right? So it's a big one. And the cumulative drought of these years is estimated to be the driest 3 years in over 1,200 years, right? So I hope we don't see it again, but according to the record, we shouldn't really see it again, but will we? That's a question for climate change science, isn't it? We all know that climate warming is happening, right? And its effects will potentially be very dramatic. Model projections for 2100 exceed the full distribution of Holocene temperature under all plausible greenhouse gas emission scenarios, right? So we expect that there are potentially huge floristic rearrangements, right, perhaps in our state. Last year, we heard some bad news from our keynote speaker, Susan Harrison, about diminishing plant diversity in California grasslands. Having monitored these grasslands in her group for almost a couple of decades. And I think tonight's keynote speaker, I'm not sure the news is going to get much better, judging from the title and having heard Dr. Safford's talks in the past on some of these subjects. But we have to be adaptive, right? But for just have to put it out there, right? I feel like when I was doing this talk, it ended up being, looking over the schedule, it ended up being kind of an introduction for a lot of things people are talking about today. So let's set a context here. California's diverse, right? Extremely diverse. Over 5,500 native taxa, over 40% in the California floristic province are endemic. Over 1,000 naturalized non-native taxa, right? Why is it so diverse? We kind of know this, right? It's topographic and edaphic complexity, basically, right? It's a state full of complex environments, and that heterogeneity breeds diversity. But we are one region out of several regions in the world that are also diverse because of the similar climate envelope that they're in, right? We're in a Mediterranean climate. Mediterranean climates are diverse places, right? And why are they diverse? This is the subject of really interesting debates. I won't get into those debates, but perhaps extinction rates are really low. Perhaps we've had high speciation rates. Perhaps we've had higher immigration rates in the past. That's a cool debate. Won't get into it. The point is, we've got a lot of species here. We've got a lot of heterogeneity. What's going to happen under climate change? So these are my 5 questions, okay? And they came up from me just thinking about them and sort of writing lists and making a little hue here, and here they are. Can plants hide in local environments or local habitats from climate change? How can plants hide in how long can plants hide in seed banks? What is our extinction debt from climate change and from the habitat loss we've already suffered? What is the toll from invasive species? And what is the capacity of native species to adapt rather than just shift their species ranges? What's the capacity? So these are my 5 questions. I would love to hear your 5 questions. So I invite you, to write down your top 5 questions about what you think we should know for plant conservation and climate change, and email them to me. And maybe I'll put them on my website, tally them up. I'd love to hear from you. But I'd love to have more conversations about this too throughout the next couple of days. So, okay, number 1, can plants hide in local habitat? So this is a picture of, we're in this giant sequoia grove in Yosemite National Park. This is the Tuolumne Grove. We're looking at sequoia seedlings that germinated sometime after the rim fire in 2013. And this is Molly Stevens, a scientist in our lab, and she's leading our group in an exploration of the habitat heterogeneity in this sequoia grove. So this is a project that we're doing with Yosemite Conservancy and Yosemite National Park, and we've had lots of help from lots of students and volunteers. And what we're trying to do is understand the giant sequoia seedling niche, essentially, at the ground level inside the grove. So we've put sensors throughout the grove. We're monitoring temperature, light levels. We are sampling soil attributes. And we're in preliminary stages, but we're trying to understand what microenvironments do these giant sequoia seedlings enjoy. And so I'll share a few little preliminary results. In the grove, we find more and larger seedlings in wetter soils. Okay. More seedlings in higher survival and higher sequoia duff and in moss cover. They seem to like that. Fewer and smaller seedlings with greater duff depth. Okay, so this kind of corroborates the idea that they like fires to come through and clear areas for them. And smaller seedlings with greater duff depth. Okay, so this kind of understanding about individual species is something I think is necessary. What micro or local environments do they need, especially when they're growing under challenging conditions like during droughts. This is another example of looking at local habitat heterogeneity. This is a meadow study that we did looking at the response of 7 plant species that occupy meadows within Yosemite National Park. So we surveyed 16 meadows, and I say we, I mainly mean Laurel, Sebastian, and Michael Spade. Laurel was on an NSF-RU undergrad experience, and Michael was an undergrad at UC Merced, and they spent many hours trying to understand the abundance of plants in these meadows during the Great Drought, 2014, and we resampled this summer. I'm only showing a glimpse of results. But in general, across the entire transect, we see that this is a community abundance index we won't get into, but in general, if you look at soil moisture just down to the first 12 centimeters, it seems to predict abundance in this community. So plants and meadows like water, oh right, what a great finding. But that's what we that's what we can measure when we're looking across all these meadows. Now the point I'd like to make though from this study, it doesn't read so easily, but we're looking at all 16 meadows across 3 gradients: elevation, precipitation, and maximum growing season temperature, okay? And these are soil moisture variables measured down to 12 centimeters, so very shallow soil moisture depths across all of these meadows. And the thing I'd like to point out is when we're looking at some of the lower elevations or the drier precipitation meadows or the worms meadows, we see that some meadows actually have a really high variance in water availability, okay? So this sort of backs up the idea that there are local places, even in the driest, hottest, or lowest parts of the distribution, where potentially during a 700 to 900 year drought, species can hide, okay? So that's just some preliminary data to feed into that idea. Okay, question 2. How long can plants hide in seed banks? I think I'm really looking forward to some talks on the schedule because This is a topic that's going to be addressed in this symposium. It's great. And it's one that we have a lot of interest in ourselves. So this is Eastern Merced County vernal pool, right? And this is what it would look like in the summer. This is a student in our lab, a grad student in our lab, Daniel Kidd. And in late May of this past year, after a couple of years of this insane drought, we came across this very large playa pool with a sea of, threatened and endangered Neoscapia colosanus, right? So this is an amazing response this year, which is an average water year in 2016, I think, is about how it's falling out. And so, these soils can certainly hide a lot of diversity and hide it for a few years, right? This is another example. We've got Dr. Bob here in the distance, and this is Eastern Merced County pool that's just chock full of Orchidia inequalis, right? Millions of individuals in this pool. We need to understand how long these seeds can last in these soils. How long can they hide for? Under what climates? Under what conditions? How deep do they go? How deep are these seed banks, and how long have the seeds been there? So lots of questions. We need more seed bank experiments and seed bank detection studies. How do we germinate and propagate all of our native taxa, especially rare ones? This is something where we need a lot of ecology done. One project that we're undertaking in this system is to see if we can detect these communities using environmental DNA. So we're going to be sampling the soils, and we're going to be extracting DNA from the community and using barcodes to see if we can detect how many species we can detect, given the community information we know in the above ground. How well does it match up? This is a neat book, right? Seed propagation of native California plants. When you flip through it though, right, it just wets your whistle because there's so many hundreds of species that of course aren't in this book, And we need to build that knowledge. We need to continue building it and create a network of how do we germinate things, what are the storage capacities of these seeds, and we need to develop those networks. I'd love to talk to people about efforts that are ongoing about that and how we move forward. Okay, number 3, what is California's extinction debt? I won't go into this in great detail, but the idea of extinction debt, right, is that a certain area can host a certain diversity of species. When you reduce the habitat diversity, like through habitat turnover, you reduce the number of species that it can host, basically. This is a figure from kind of a recent study in Alba grasslands in Estonia, and looking at habitat differences in these grasslands between time A and time B. We see habitat reductions, but we also see that there's a mismatch. I won't go into this topic very much, but there's a mismatch between the expected area and the actual diversity that you see in these grasslands. So I did a thorough search of extinction debt for California, at least 10 minutes in Google Scholar, and was unsatisfied with our understanding during that 10 minutes of extinction debt in California. So there's work to be done. Okay, so extinction debt may be accruing, yet California may not be at capacity, okay? I don't know. For example, the Cape Floristic region, another one of our sister Mediterranean climates, has twice the plants, in 1/5 of the area of California, right? So 10 times the diversity. I don't know. It's a good question, right? We've added onto the next topic. What is the toll from invasive species, right? I don't think I have to belabor this issue. This is something we're all familiar with. But there's a few things that we need to know, right? Non-native diversity is high in California. We've added, like I said, over 1,000 naturalized taxa. But California extinctions are still low for our native plants. Is that an extinction debt? Or can we just crowd more plants into the car? What's going on? How many species can fit in California? Will natives adapt to invasives? Plants adapt, right? There's genetic variation and they can adapt to things. And there have actually been studies to show that there are adaptive responses to non-native organisms. Lastly, this kind of is a conundrum for me. We know from some really cool conservation biology studies in the past couple of decades that diversity generally increases resilience, right, in systems. So, One hypothesis could be that like non-native diversity that is not, being noxious might actually increase resilience in changing climates. Controversial idea, I don't know. Others have put that idea out there as well, but something to talk about. Okay, final question here. What is the capacity of native species to adapt? I mentioned this system. We have the trailing edge of ponderosa pine and of the cutleaf monkey flower here. We can see this nice, stark, dramatic response by this pine to that drought. And who knows what we're going to see in the next decade or two in these populations. But I can tell you that this cutleaf monkey flower did just fine during the 1200-year drought. And its populations are pretty secure at that low elevation range limit. This is Erin Dickman, who is a grad student in our lab. She just graduated with her master's. Woo! And she's here at the conference today. And she has a poster, so you'll have to go visit her poster. But essentially, Erin resampled 9 populations that I had sampled in the mid-2000s. She sampled the highest elevations, some middle ones, and the lowest elevations known for the cutleaf monkey flower in the western slope of the Sierra. And she found, when she grew both generations in greenhouse, go see her, you're gonna have to find out what she found. But I'll give you a hint. Plants are amazing with their adaptive capacity, okay? All right, so I want to end sort of with this latter point. I know it's come up in some of the talks this symposium. I'm really excited. But we need to really think about one management action that we can do that we really need to think more about, especially in our agencies, I would say, our management agencies, is how to think about gene flow, genetic rescue, especially for rare populations. Populations that are blinking out, appear to be blinking out. When do we throw a life rope, or a rescue? How do we do it? And I really, I'm a fan of this paper, Scrow et al. 2011, Evolutionary Applications. It gives a nice idea scheme, for how one might create seed mixes for restoration, right? And what we're seeing here is, if we're at a site, on the x-axis is the distance from the parent plant for that site, and on the y is the frequency of propagule dispersal, right? And so in this seed mix proposition, you basically, you make a seed mix where you have a high proportion of locals, a middle proportion of intermediate distance seeds, and a lower proportion of long distance seeds. And what this is doing is it's maximizing genetic diversity. I'm not saying, hey, let's do this across the whole state for every plant, but I think that at least we need more experiments like this, especially in populations that we think are suffering and blinking out. Okay, so some general conclusions here from my very general talk. Obviously, we need more knowledge about our rare flora, right? California is likely to remain diverse, right? That's not going to change. We're going to have a diverse state, I think, even in a baking hot climate. But how much of our endemic flora will endure that climate? It's a totally open question. Failing major knowledge gains, right? And it's always a question, if I have the knowledge, what would I do with it? And can I actually act on it? But failing major knowledge gains, well, let's conserve and restore California land, as in this room I think we all know we need to do. But focus on local gradients. I think that there's a lot of potential there for some climate buffering, of course. Minimize new development, keep managing invasives, study seed banks, and keep learning how to grow plants in the state. I mean, I think we really need a network of understanding for all of our rare, unique flora. And always promote genetic diversity within native species. The adaptive capacity is really important to continue supporting. So. I'd like to thank many people, a lot of collaborators on the list, people who allowed us to go onto their land, including agencies here, and these funding sources. And I thank you for your attention.